Questions 8 through 11 are a multiple part question which focus on some text, 2 charts and a table. So let's look at the first chart and work through the text. So we're told that a new electronics company has released 6 new products this year, which we can see on the chart. Product 1 at the start of January, which we can see in the key, is labelled by a black bar. Product 2 was released at the start of March, which still falls within the January to March key. Product 3 was released at the end of May, which means it falls between April and June, which has this type of bar, as do the previous 2 others, which were released earlier in the year. Product 4 was released at the start of July, which means that it falls within this grey bar. Product 5 at the start of September, which likewise starts within July to September. And finally product 6, which was released in November, which is between October and December. So we can see the release times differ throughout the year, but those produced earlier in the year are still sold later in the year. Obviously this graph shows sales and the number of products sold with respect to time. The income for a particular month, December, is shown here. So we can see that different products sold differently. The income for one particular month, December, is shown here. So we can see that different products sold different amounts. The price at which different products are sold are shown in this table, which we can see is price per 100 units, the most expensive being product 6 at 4,000 and the least expensive being product 4 at 1,000. So let's move on to the questions. Question 8 asks, what was the total income from April to June? So the first thing we should do is look to this chart and look for the stripy bars, which represent April to June, and the amount sold within this period. As we can see, if we zoom in, 800 units were sold for product 1, product 2 and product 3. So, bearing that in mind, we can write down 800 3 times and multiply by the costs of each respective unit. So now that we've written out the product prices for 1, 2 and 3, we can see that this doesn't look quite right, but then we should remember that the price per 100 units is lower. So now that we've written out 800 with all of the product prices, we can see that this looks a bit strange, but we should have remembered that the price is per 100 units, so 800 should be represented as 8. So there we go, that simplifies things. So we can work out what these values are. A good tip when multiplying a large number by a smaller number is to reduce 1,500, for example, to 1.5k. So then 8 times 1.5 we know to be 12, so 12 times 1k would be 12,000, which we can write down for these two. Likewise, 8 times 2,000 we know to be 16,000. So, adding all of those up, we can see that the answer here is 40,000, which gives us our answer C. So, now that we're done with question 8, let's move on to question 9. Well, in question 9 we're told that when product 2, which we can see here, has been on sale for 3 months, 2/3 of its sales had been in the first month. So let's bear in mind that product 2 was sold at the start of March, and we're told that when it had been on sale for 3 months, so March, April, May, 2/3 of its sales had been in the first month, namely March. So March contained 2/3 of sales. So what we're being asked is how much money was generated from product 2 sales in June. Now, this is a strange question, but we have to bear in mind that this is because of the groupings of the sales of the products, which can be in our favour when it comes to working out individual month sales. So the question being asked is sales in June. Looking to the graph, we can see that the January through March bar, the black bar, will only include March for product 2 because it was sold at the start of March. So this bar is effectively a March bar. So it might not be as tasty as a Mars bar, but it still works out for us. So 900 is roughly what March sold of product 2. So 2/3 of the sales in March is actually equivalent to 900 sales. So what is 900 2/3 of? So 900 over 2 times 3 would help work that out. So 450 times 3, which is 900 plus 450, which is just 1350, which is the total number of sales between March. Sorry, the total number of sales overall in that 3-month period. So let's move that 1350 across to here. 1350 sales. So we know that in April and May, the 2 months also represented within this 3-month period, there must have been 450 sales. So we can write that here. So that's 450 sales, which is important because if we look at this stripy bar, which is represented in product 2, which achieved 800 sales, this includes April, May, and June. But we know that just April and May had 450. To round off the 800 sold, we know that in June there were, in fact, 350 sales. If we multiply this by the per unit sales, or the per 100 unit sales shown here, to be 2,000 per 100 units, we can multiply 3.5 by 2,000 to get $7,000, which we can see the answer to be D, the amount sold in June. So let's move on to question 10, where we're being asked how many units of product 6 were sold in November. Well, let's remember the fact that product 6 was sold at the start of November, and that for the financial year all we have is November through to December. So this bar here, this bar here represents October to December, but in reality it reflects only November and December. So we do have the December income, which is $6,000 if you correspond it to here. So 6,000, which, as we can see from the table, corresponds to 150 units, as 4,000 is the price for 100. 100 being 4,000, 50 being the 2,000, to give 6,000 in total. So if 150 units were sold in December, and as we can see from here, 600 were sold overall in November through to December, this means that 450 units must have been sold in November. This gives us our answer, which is D. So let's move on to question 11, where we're being asked which of the products had the highest average monthly sales in terms of the number of units sold since it was released. So we're being asked in terms of units sold as opposed to price. So the income and the relative price of per 100 units doesn't factor in. We're just being asked about the number of products sold, which is from this chart here. So we'll go through each of the products in turn and quickly try to identify the highest average. Some time-saving tips might be to compare products 1 and product 2, which appear ostensibly to be quite similar, but bear in mind this bar here and this bar here represent two very different things. In product 1 it represents 3 months, January, February and March, whereas in product 2 just the one, March, when it was released. So this means that this ostensibly similar number of products sold is over 10 months as opposed to 12, so we can immediately discount product 1 as having the highest. So all similarly we can look at products 4 and 5, where product 5 was sold at the start of September, at the end of this grey bar July to September window. If we pan across, we can see that. But if we to compare it to product 4, it's higher on both counts, so we can immediately eliminate product 4 from the equation. So we can go through the rest mathematically. For product 2, 900 products were sold, plus 800, that takes us up to 1700, plus another 700 takes us up to 2400, plus finally 700, which is 3100. So 3100 over 10 months, given that it started in March. Okay, moving on to product 3, we can see that there was, to start with, 800 plus 1100, which is 1900, plus 700 here. So 1900 plus 700 is 2600. Let's write that down. And because it started in May, which is the 5th month, we can say that's 7 months in total. So let's move on to product 5. Let's move on to product 5, where we can see that there was 700 in both months, which is 1400. As we said, product 5 started in September, so September through to December is 3 months. Excuse me. So moving on to product 6, which we know just had November and December, the 2 months. Let's move on to product 5, where we can see. Let's move on to product 5. So let's look through the other months. Let's start with product 2, where we can see that there's 900 sold, followed by 800, which gives 1700. Another 800 gives us 2500. And finally, 700 here gives us 3200. So we can write that down. 3200 over 10 months, because we're not including January and February. Okay, product 3 has 800, followed by 1100, which is 1900. And finally we have here 700, so we can say this is 2600. Excuse me, I'll do that more clearly. 2600 over a window which started in May. So that means that we have a total of 8 months. So we can move on to product 5, where we have 700 in both counts. So it's 1400 divided by, given that it started in September, product 5, September through to December is 4 months. Finally, we have product 6, which, as we know, has 600 on both counts, both months. So that's 600 over 2. So we can work out a rough guide to what all of these are. So after assessing the options, we can see that product 5 has the highest per month average. We can then say the answer is E.